In the pursuit of ultimate truth, human logic eventually hits a wall. To go further, you have to leave structure behind. Across diverse spiritual traditions, there is a surprising consensus. A purely intellectual approach to reality is insufficient. Bypassing this intellectual limit requires a personal surrender. You have to let go of the ego's control and step into the unknown, a universal spiritual action commonly known as the leap. But while these traditions agree that the leap is necessary, they sharply disagree on what actually happens to the individual I once that leap is taken. This chart maps out the fate of the ego. By comparing three distinct spiritual paths, we can analyze how they define the self, alongside the ultimate destination they propose for it: complete dissolution, passionate assertion, or radical reconstitution. Beyond the method of reaching truth lies a more pressing gamble: whether the self survives the encounter at all. The first approach to the self comes from ancient Eastern philosophy, specifically Taoism. The core Taoist diagnosis is that the individual ego is an illusion. It acts as a rigid barrier, preventing true harmony and enlightenment. To overcome this, practitioners pursue Wu Wei and the path of the return. This requires letting go of any fixed identity defined by past experiences, becoming entirely fluid and adaptable. The goal is a complete loss of distinct boundaries. The individual personality is absorbed, exactly like a single water droplet hitting the ocean surface and instantly disappearing into the whole. Returning to our matrix, we can plot the result of the Taoist leap. The self is identified as an illusion, and its final destination is dissolution into the cosmic whole. In this model, the self transcends its limitations by ceasing to exist as a separate entity, finding its peace in total annihilation. 19th century Denmark offers an opposing philosophy. The existentialist thinker Søren Kierkegaard rejects the dissolution of the self entirely. For Kierkegaard, the self is a dynamic, relational synthesis, an agonizing tension between the finite and the infinite. When this synthesis fails to ground itself in its creator, the resulting internal misrelation creates a state of deep anxiety. Kierkegaard termed this the sickness unto death. His solution is the leap of faith. This is a highly subjective and entirely arbitrary choice to violently re-anchor the self to the divine, which he calls the absolute. Looking at our matrix, we see a stark contrast. The Kierkegaardian self is an anxious synthesis, culminating in a passionate recentering of the individual. This path saves the ego from annihilation, but it leaves the individual stranded in defiant isolation, standing entirely alone before objective uncertainty. There is a theological trap inherent in Kierkegaard's model. Relying entirely on a human-initiated choice risks a dangerous form of arrogance. The Swiss theologian Karl Barth recognized this risk, leading to his absolute rejection of any human-initiated religion. Barth argued that any attempt by human beings to reach out and grasp at God from their own subjective capacity is actually a form of unbelief. It contradicts the nature of faith, which is to receive a gift. True knowledge of God, according to Barth, is a divine contradiction to human striving. It only happens when God reveals himself vertically from above. But this objective divine action shatters the subjective human attempt to bridge the gap from the bottom up. This reframes the leap as an act of faith-filled obedience. It is a response to a prior, sovereign act of grace. The final path, Pauline mysticism, rests on a radical reconstitution of identity. It is grounded in the paradoxical claim of being crucified with Christ. This path introduces a significant ontological paradox. How can a finite human unite with an infinite God without being instantly absorbed and destroyed? The theologian Vladimir Lossky provides the mechanical answer to this paradox through the Eastern Orthodox doctrine of theosis, or deification. Lossky's diagram shows God's ultimate essence, or ousia, is radically unknowable, but God is fully communicable through his uncreated energies. When the self enters this energy field, it takes on God's characteristics, participating in the divine nature without breaching the inaccessible essence. Plotting this on our final matrix row, the Pauline path identifies the old self as bound by sin and results in a radical reconstitution. Through theosis, the self is emptied and then perfected. Participation in the divine energies ensures the person becomes exactly what they were created to be, rather than disappearing into nothingness. This alchemical remaking of the self is grounded in a specific, objective historical event, the Incarnation. In the Incarnation, uncreated divine nature united perfectly with created human nature. This single event serves as the blueprint that makes human deification mechanically possible. The final conceptual state of the self is what theology calls being hypostatized. The individual is deeply embedded, finding its true identity only within the living reality of Christ. Looking at our three spiritual destinations, the Taoist path leaves us with a flat, empty ocean. The Kierkegaardian path leaves a solitary point vibrating alone in the dark. But the Christian mystical path embeds the glowing individual node perfectly within a massive, structured network of light. This is the ultimate spiritual paradox expressed in Galatians 2:20. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The old, isolated self is slain, yet the transformed believer is now more truly alive than ever before. The Christian mystical path requires the death of the I to facilitate its resurrection. In this framework, the self is finally and eternally found.